This video explains the truth about French President Emmanuel Macron's wife Brigitte and how he and others are victims of German evils. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. The sort of official line about French President Emmanuel Macron's wife Brigitte, who is 68 years old and 25 years his senior, is this. She is the youngest of 6 children and comes from a wealthy French family which owns a French chocolate making empire. Emmanuel Macron, the youngest president in France's history, was only 15 years old when he was a student in a Catholic school with Brigitte's daughter Laurence, who is the same age as him. He and daughter Laurence attended drama class together, which was taught by Brigitte. At that time, Brigitte was married to Andre Louis Auzier, a banker, and they had 3 children together. Brigitte's firstborn is Sebastian, who is now 45 years old. He is an engineer by profession and the vice president of a polling agency. Her elder daughter is Laurence Auzier Jordan, date of birth 1977, and she is a cardiologist. And the younger daughter is Tiffany Auzier, date of birth 1984, who is a lawyer. The story goes that a romantic relationship developed between Macron and Brigitte in the school at Amiens, France. His parents believed that their son was in love with the daughter Laurence, but were quite shocked at the rumors of romance between their teenage son and his teacher, who was 25 years his senior, when she was still married to the father of her 3 children. So they removed him from his school in Amiens and sent him off to Paris to finish his education. But apparently, the flame of love could not be doused. In a 2018 interview with Paris Match magazine, Brigitte is supposed to have revealed that Macron had vowed to marry her when he was merely 17 years old. Brigitte and her former husband Andre Auzier were divorced in January 2006. She and Macron married in October 2007. Believe it or not, I have never believed the story from about May 2017 when I came to know about the story and who Emmanuel Macron was, because he was campaigning to be elected as President of France. But I kept my belief to myself till now. The reason I did not believe the story is that I know Germans and German masqueraders living in France very well. German masqueraders in France were engaged in doing exactly the same kind of things to the French that German masqueraders in America and Britain were doing to the Americans and British. Without any hesitation, I came to the conclusion that German masqueraders used threats to force Macron to break up his relationship with Brigitte's daughter Laurence in school and forced him to get involved with Brigitte. They forced Brigitte with threats to do the same. Seeing the danger to their teenage son from the threats, Macron's parents probably took the step to move him to Paris, which in itself was a risk they were taking, as violence could be done to him for disobeying the threats issued to him. However, there must have been some masquerader or masqueraders in Amiens who were following Macron's life very closely. So he must have been prevented from dating and marrying anyone else who was young with threats. Girls must have been threatened to not date with him. I know German masqueraders do such things from personal experience. Macron was a bright young man who did well as an investment banker and then was a rising star in French politics. German masqueraders are particular about preventing such bright people from marrying and having bright and intelligent children. This is one of the strategies they use to dumb down France. They have been pursuing the same strategy in America and Britain for the past 6 decades. That's why they prevented and have been prevented Macron from marrying a young woman so that he would not have any children. Having said all this, I have to find fault with President Emmanuel Macron as well. By continuing to succumb to the threats of German masqueraders, he is not setting a good example for other young French men and women in similar situations. He is not the president of France. Germans or German masqueraders can't harm him without suffering some consequences themselves. He should not have married Brigitte in the first place, but since he did marry her, he should have divorced his wife Brigitte long ago and married a younger woman and had children. The Bible permits divorce in cases where fraud or coercion cause the marriage to take place. Since he has not yet set the right example for young men and women of France by resisting the threats of masqueraders, it casts doubts on his inner strength and courage to resist threats and other pressure from Germany and German masqueraders in affairs of state. French allies have to wonder whether they can rely on France for help in time of need if Emmanuel Macron is heading French affairs of state. Now, Ezekiel 13:3 verse 17 says, Son of man, I have made you a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore hear the word at my mouth, and give them warning from me. As a watchman to the house of Israel, meaning to America and British Commonwealth nations, it is my duty to warn them of all possible dangers as I perceive them. It is up to Macron to take actions in his personal life to allay those fears of French allies. He should set the right example for the young people of France by defying the German and German masqueraders in France by not succumbing to their threats. But I still have to warn the Americans and British people. There is one more fact that about President Emmanuel Macron that is worth considering. Though he claims to be agnostic, he is a baptized Catholic and was educated in a Jesuit Catholic school. That is very significant because of Bible prophecy. I have discussed Bible prophecy in my videos, which will be fulfilled in the very near future. The relevant sequence of events that applies to France is this. First, the Bible prophesies that because of their national sins and violations of God's law, America, British Commonwealth nations, and the Jewish state of Israel will be soon defeated in a world war by a coalition of nations led by Germany. Much of their population will perish and the survivors will be sold around the world as slaves. Number 2, actually all nations descended from the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are to be punished for their sins. But only America and British Commonwealth nations, being descendants of Joseph, will be punished with national slavery because they have received the greater birthright blessings of great material wealth and national greatness than the other Israelite nations. But they have been unthankful to God and have violated his laws. The Jews will be punished with national slavery because they have received the scepter promise of rulership over Israelite nations and even over many other nations. But they too have violated God's laws despite having received the incredible blessing of being kings and rulers over many nations. That is why they will be punished with national slavery. Number 3, besides the Jews, British and American peoples, other descendants of the patriarch Jacob, whose other name was Israel, live in France, Ireland, Switzerland, Scandinavian, and Benelux countries. They too have been blessed materially, but have been unthankful to God and have grossly violated his laws. They too will be severely punished with war and destruction, but not with national slavery. This is prophesied in Ezekiel 5 verse 4. Then take of them and cast them into the midst of the fire and burn them in the fire, for thereof shall a fire come forth into all the house of Israel. Fire going unto all the house of Israel means that war against America, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel will then spread to the other nations descended from Israel. That is why France becomes very important. This is the interpretation of verse 4 that I wrote in my ebook World and Bible Prophecy, which is available free on my religion website www.churchofgodmessage.com. I wrote, what causes this fire to go out is described in verse 3. Here Ezekiel was asked to take some of the hair of his head and beard and bind them in his skirts, indicating some of the Israelites will be protected when the beast, meaning the German dictator, defeats them. Then God says, take some of those that are protected and throw them into the fire to burn them. This is a dual prophecy. It applies to the physical Israelites, meaning America, British Commonwealth nations, and the Jews, as well as spiritual Israelites who are members of God's true church. Concerning God's church, this prophecy indicates that members of God's church will be protected, but not all of them. Those that are lukewarm will be thrown into the fire of the great tribulation and burned. Some of these lukewarm members will be in the Israelite countries of the house of Israel, meaning France, Scandinavian, Benelux countries, and Ireland and Switzerland, excluding United States and Britain. The German dictator called the beast in prophecy and the false prophet, who will be the Pope of the Roman Church, will ask these countries to give up or hand over these members of God's church to the Germans and the Pope. That is what will cause the fire to go out into these countries. In addition, a few of the Israelites, meaning Americans, Britons, and the Jews, may escape to these countries, which is France and other northwestern European countries. These are those that were symbolically bound in Ezekiel's skirts, means protected, when the beast or the German-led alliance attacks them. The beast will ask them to give up these few Israelites also, along with members of God's true church, but they will likely refuse. That will most likely be the cause that the beast and the false prophet target them, thus fulfilling the prophecy in Ezekiel 5 verse 4, that a fire will come forth into all the house of Israel. The interpretation I gave on Ezekiel 5 verse 4 is that France and other Israelite nations of northwestern Europe will likely refuse to hand over the Americans, Britons, the Jews, and members of God's church to the Germans and the Pope to be killed. Because of this refusal, these Israelite nations will be attacked. However, the prophecy simply means that war will engulf these northwestern European nations after the defeat of America, Britain, and the Jews. This is very significant. War will engulf these northwestern European nations after the defeat of America, Britain, and the Jews. This means when America, Britain, and the Israelite are under attack by the German-led alliance, the French, the Scandinavian, and Benelux nations will not be assisting them in any way during the attack. The attack on the French and other northwestern European nations comes after the American, British, and the Jews have been defeated. The reasons I gave for this attack on the French and northwestern European nations are mere speculation on my part. Jeremiah 30 verse 7 calls this war as the time of Jacob's trouble. The term Jacob means it is the time of trouble for all descendant nations of the patriarch Jacob or Israel. Therefore, no matter if there is or there isn't a cause, the war will spread to these nations because the Germans hate all these nations and want to destroy them. Now, the Francis Christians are nearly 90% Catholics. The Pope and the Catholics will be allied with the Germans. The Pope will perform many miracles, and the world will think that the religion preached by him is the true religion. Catholics worldwide will be energized and will blindly obey the Pope. That's why President Macron's Catholic upbringing may be significant. This means that when the French and the other northwestern European nations are threatened by the German dictator and the Pope to give up the Americans, Britons, Jews, and members of God's church among them, they may consider it their duty to obey the Pope because they think his religion is the true religion. So they may be inclined to hand over the Americans, Britons, and Jews and members of God's church to the Germans and the Pope. And there is another reason they may succumb to the pressure from the Germans and the Pope. Just imagine the pressure on the French and other Northwest European nations and Northwest European Israelite nations because of the threats. The German-led alliance has just defeated two of the mightiest people and the mightiest military alliance on the face of the earth, the American, British, and Jewish alliance. What power will France have to resist their threats? That's the kind of pressure French leaders will be faced with. They will have a decision to make. That's the kind of decision President Macron will have to make if he is still the president of France when the American, British, and Jewish alliance is defeated and their survivors enslaved. Macron's coming to German pressure in his personal life right now, when Germany is already hardly in control of the world, gives us pause for thought whether he, that is Macron, will be able to resist German and Pope's pressure after the defeat of the American, British, and Jewish alliance. He may also be able to justify his decision if he chooses to hand over the Americans, Britain, and Jews and members of God's church, because like all Catholics, he would have been deceived by the Pope into believing that Catholicism is God's true religion. I can only hope that President Macron will decide not to give up the American, British, and Jewish fugitives who escaped to France. But I do not know how he will decide when faced with such a stark choice under tremendous pressure and threats. At this time, we can only speculate how he will decide based on his past efforts, based on his past actions. In the part 2 video, I will describe some of the evil tactics Germans use to inflict pain and suffering on people and with threats force them to do things against their will. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube channel and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Herman G. Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos. Now, some people do not have the time to go through the full length of videos. They find it more convenient to read the text of the video. Unfortunately, YouTube does not provide the facility to make the text of my videos available on YouTube. But fortunately, Facebook does provide that facility. So I make the text of my videos available on my Facebook channel, which you can easily copy.